The boy who wasn't enough. The rain was falling heavily that Sunday afternoon in Portland, Oregon. James stood on the porch of the Sterling mansion, his clothes soaked, his heart pounding. He held a small bouquet of wilted flowers, bought with the last coins he had in his pocket. At 22, James worked 12 hours a day in a downtown warehouse. I woke up at 5 in the morning, took 2 buses to work, and at night I studied business at a community college. His hands were calloused, his eyes were always tired, but there was something about him that would not bend. Hope. Inside that huge house was Ellen. Ellen Sterling, 20 years old, brown hair that shone in the sun, smile that calmed any storm. She was the daughter of successful businessmen, owners of a chain of department stores that dominated the region. And Donald, James, was just the poor kid from the working-class neighborhood. They met in the college library by chance. Ellen was looking for a book on the top shelf, and Donald, who was passing by, offered to help. Their eyes met, and something inexplicable happened. A silent, deep connection, the kind that doesn't need words. In the following months, they were in hiding. Walks in the park, endless conversations in cheap cafes, shared laughter on park benches. James discovered that Ellen didn't care about money. She saw in him something her family never would, a man of character, dreams, and courage. But their world was unforgiving. The Sterling family discovered the relationship. And on that rainy afternoon, when James rang the mansion's doorbell, he was greeted by Richard Sterling, Ellen's father. Richard was a tall man in an impeccable suit with an icy gaze. He looked James up and down, as if sizing up a worthless object. Without saying a word, he took some banknotes from his pocket and handed them to the boy. James felt his blood boil, but before he could react, Richard spoke in a cold, cutting voice. "You're not enough for my daughter, boy. You never will be. Take this and disappear from her life." James didn't take the money. He let the flowers fall to the wet ground, took a deep breath, and stared into Richard's eyes. "One day I'll be back, sir, and when I do, you'll regret underestimating me." Richard laughed disdainfully, closing the door in Donald's face. But something in the boy's gaze bothered him. There was a determination there that he hadn't expected to see. That night, James walked miles in the rain to his house. He didn't cry, but he made a promise to himself. He would return, rich, successful, and free of any doubts. And when he returned, he would marry Ellen. Inside the mansion, hidden behind the curtains on the second floor, Ellen watched James walk away. Tears streamed down her face, but she pressed her hands to her chest. She knew this wasn't goodbye. It was just the beginning of something bigger. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this incredible story. You won't believe what happens next. When dreams cost everything. The following days were the hardest of Donald's life. He woke up in the same cramped room he shared with his younger brother, Hector. The peeling walls, the thin mattress, the damp smell that never left. But now, everything weighed differently. Hector was 18 and worked as a pizza delivery boy. He saw his older brother as a hero, someone who never gave up. But these days, Hector noticed something different in Donald's eyes. A mixture of pain and fury, as if something inside him had simultaneously broken and rebuilt itself. At the warehouse where James worked, things weren't any easier. Heavy boxes, endless shifts, bosses who yelled at every opportunity, but James never complained. He carried each box as if it were his own future. During lunch break, while his classmates chatted and laughed, James studied books on management, economics, business strategies. He wrote everything down in a worn notebook, underlining sentences, making plans. The other workers mocked him. "Look at that college student," they said. "Do you think you're going to become a CEO?" James didn't answer. He just smiled slightly and went back to studying. Because he knew something they didn't. He had a reason not to give up. At night, at community college, James was a different man. He always sat in the front row, asked all the questions, and participated in all the group projects. His professors noticed something in him, a hunger for knowledge that went beyond grades. It was as if he were racing against time. A teacher, Mrs. Dorothy Carter, called James after class. She was a woman in her 60s with grey hair and a kind but firm gaze. "You have talent, Donald, but talent without opportunity is not enough." She handed him a business card for a scholarship program for entrepreneurs. "This could change your life. Don't waste it." James treasured that card like it was gold. That night, before he fell asleep, he stared at the cracked ceiling of his room. He thought of Ellen, her smile, the way she looked at him, and he thought of Richard Sterling, that look of contempt. He clenched his fists beneath the thin blanket. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving his worth, that he wasn't just the poor boy who dared to love beyond his station. The next day, James woke up even earlier. Before work, he went to a public library and filled out the scholarship application. There were dozens of questions, requests for documents, and letters of recommendation. He didn't know if he'd be accepted, but he had to try. Meanwhile, across town, Ellen lived in her own gilded prison. Her parents enrolled her in etiquette classes, social events, and dinners with children of other wealthy families. They wanted her to forget Donald, to find someone of her own caliber. But every night before bed, Ellen opened the drawer of her nightstand. Inside, she kept a hidden photo, her and James on a park bench, smiling as if the world were theirs. She touched the photo with trembling fingers. A tear fell silently. She didn't know where he was, if he was okay, if he still thought of her, but something inside her refused to give up. One afternoon, while having tea with her mother, Eleanor Sterling, Ellen summoned her courage. "Mother, I won't marry anyone you choose." Eleanor slammed the cup down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You're a spoiled brat, Ellen. You don't know what it's like to be in need. That boy would drag you down to poverty." Ellen felt the words like knives, but she lifted her chin and looked her mother in the eye. "I'd rather be poor with him than have all this wealth without love." Eleanor fell silent. For the first time she saw determination in her daughter's eyes, and it frightened her. That night, Ellen wrote a letter. She didn't know if she could send it, but she needed to put everything she felt on paper. "Donald, wherever you are, I will wait. No matter how long it takes, I believe in you." She folded the letter and put it in a sealed envelope, and waited. She waited like someone waiting for the sun to rise after the longest night. The force that no one saw. 3 months had passed since that rainy afternoon at the Sterling mansion. James had a routine that would destroy most people. Waking up at 4:30 a.m., running 3 miles before work, taking a cold shower to wake up. He told himself that each sacrifice was a step on the ladder he was building. At the warehouse, things began to change. The manager, a man named Frank Morrison, was tough but fair. He noticed that James was never late, never complained, and always finished his tasks before anyone else. One day, Frank called James into his cramped office in the back of the warehouse. "You want to make more money, kid?" James looked up in surprise. "Of course, Mr. Morrison." Frank explained he needed someone to order inventory, organize spreadsheets, and deal with suppliers. It was extra work, 2 hours more per day, but it would pay 30% more. James accepted immediately. From that day on, James worked 14 hours a day. His body was screaming, his legs felt heavy as lead, his eyes burned with fatigue. But he didn't stop, because every extra penny was one step closer to his goal. At college, the scholarship program's response arrived. James opened the envelope with trembling hands. He had been accepted. For the first time in months, he allowed a genuine smile to appear on his face. The program offered mentorship from successful entrepreneurs, networking opportunities, and access to investors. James knew this was his big chance. He couldn't waste it. On weekends, while Hector went out with friends, James attended the program's meetups. There, he met people who came from completely different worlds. Some were arrogant, others friendly, but they all had one thing in common: ambition. At one of these meetings, James met Marcus Webb, a 50-year-old black entrepreneur who had started from scratch. Marcus had built a logistics empire from a single delivery truck. He looked at James and saw something familiar: a hunger for change. After the meeting, Marcus invited James to coffee. They went to a small bakery downtown, far from the sophisticated surroundings of the other attendees. Marcus ordered 2 black coffees and stared at Donald. "Why are you doing this, boy? Money, power." James took a deep breath. "For a girl." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was the laugh of someone who understood. The best reasons are always the simplest. "But let me give you some advice, son. If you want to succeed, you can't do it just for her. You have to do it for yourself, too. Because if you build your empire just thinking about her, and one day she leaves, you'll crumble with her." James was silent, absorbing those words. Marcus was right. He needed to want this for himself, not just to prove a point to the Sterlings. From that day on, something changed in Donald. He no longer thought only of returning rich to retrieve Ellen. He thought of becoming someone he could respect, someone who, looking in the mirror, could say, "I did everything I could." Meanwhile, across town, Ellen was facing her own battles. Her parents had become stricter. They controlled her outings, monitored her phone calls, and practically kept her a prisoner at home. Richard Sterling secretly feared that his daughter would run off with that poor boy. But Ellen had an unexpected ally, her grandmother, Martha Sterling. Martha was a 75-year-old widow, possessing a wisdom that only age brings. She had married for love in her youth, against the wishes of her own family, and she saw in Ellen the same spark she herself once had. One afternoon, while Richard and Eleanor were in a business meeting, Martha invited Ellen to join her for tea in her garden. The spring sun filtered through the trees, and birds sang in the distance. Martha gently held her granddaughter's hand. "Do you still love him?" Ellen felt the tears well up. "Yes, Grandma, every day." Martha smiled tenderly. "So don't give up, dear. True love is rare, and when it appears, it's worth fighting for. Your grandfather was poor when we met. My parents hated him, but he worked, fought, and proved himself worthy, and I've never regretted waiting for him." Ellen hugged her grandmother tightly. For the first time in months, she felt she wasn't alone. That night, Ellen returned to her room and retrieved the letter she had written to Donald. She still didn't know how to send it, but she kept the paper like a charm. A silent promise that their love wasn't over. And in his small room across town, James wrote in his battered notebook. He made plans, jotted down ideas, calculated how long it would take to achieve his goals. At the top of the page, in large letters, he had written, 5 years. 5 years to become someone. 5 years to return. 5 years to prove that their love was stronger than any prejudice. He didn't know if Ellen would wait for him, but he had to believe she would, because that hope was the only thing keeping him going. Every fall was a new beginning. The first year was the most brutal. James worked at the warehouse, studied at night, and participated in the mentoring program on weekends. His body operated on autopilot, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. But exhaustion took its toll. One night on the way home from college, James passed out on the bus. He woke up in the hospital with Hector by his side, his younger brother's face etched with worry. The doctor was blunt. Malnutrition, extreme stress, his body at its limit. "You need to rest, young man, or your body will give out on you." James listened, but the next day he was back at work. Hector tried to convince him to slow down, but James was firm. "I don't have time to rest. Every day that passes is one day less." But Marcus Webb, his mentor, thought differently. When he heard what had happened, he called James for a serious talk. They met in an abandoned industrial park where Marcus had his first warehouse. The rusted walls, the smell of old oil, the marks of years of struggle etched into every corner. Marcus pointed to that place. "I built all this with my own hands. I worked myself to the bone just like you. But you know what I learned? That courage isn't working yourself to death. Courage is knowing when to stop, regain strength, and come back stronger." James looked at the ground, fighting back the tears that insisted on rising. "I can't stop. If I stop, they were right about me." Marcus placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, you've already proven yourself. Every day you get up and keep going, you prove it, but you won't get anywhere if you break down along the way." Those words resonated with James for days. He began sleeping 6 hours a night, eating decent meals, and setting aside Sundays for rest. And surprisingly, his productivity increased. His mind became clearer, his ideas more creative. During the mentorship program, James presented his first business idea. It was simple, a reverse logistics service for small businesses, something no one else was doing in the region. The mentors were impressed. One of them, an investor named Robert Chen, offered a $3,000 seed investment. James couldn't believe it. $3,000 was more money than he'd ever seen in his life, but it was also a huge responsibility. He accepted, knowing there was no room for error. With the money, James rented a small warehouse, bought a used van, and started his first company. He called it Sterling Logistics. The name was a silent tribute to Ellen, a daily reminder of why he was doing all this. The first few months were chaotic. James did everything himself, driving the van, negotiating with clients, organizing routes, and doing the accounting. Hector quit his delivery job to help his brother. Together, they worked 18-hour days. But customers started showing up. Small shops, restaurants, neighborhood markets. James had something his competitors didn't. He genuinely cared. He called customers to confirm deliveries, solved problems in the middle of the night, and never promised anything he couldn't deliver. Within 6 months, Sterling Logistics had 15 regular customers. Within a year, 30. James hired 2 employees, then 5, then 10. The van grew into 3 vans, then a small fleet, but success took its toll. James had no social life, no going out, no dating. Every night before bed, he looked at a photo of Ellen he kept hidden in his wallet. She still smiled at him from that photo, frozen in time. And he wondered if she still thought about him. Across town, Ellen was facing her own challenges. 2 years had passed since she last saw Donald. She had graduated from college with a degree in literature, but she didn't know what to do with her life. Her parents wanted her to work for the family business, but Ellen refused. Working for Sterling would be a betrayal of everything she and James had dreamed of together. One day, Ellen did something unexpected. She began volunteering at a community library downtown. It was a simple place, frequented by humble people, many of them immigrants. There, away from the judgmental gaze of her parents, Ellen felt free. It was in that library that she met Rosa Martinez, a 60-year-old Mexican woman. Rosa worked as a cleaner in the library building. She had calloused hands, a back bent from work, but eyes full of life. Rosa and Ellen became unlikely friends. During breaks, they talked about everything: life, love, dreams. One day, Ellen confessed about Donald. Rosa listened silently, then smiled tenderly. "My daughter, if he promised to return, he will. Men of their word are rare, but when they appear, they are forever." Ellen squeezed Rosa's hand tightly. "But what if he forgets me? What if he finds someone else?" Rosa shook her head. "Your heart knows. You'll know if he still loves you. And until then, you live. Don't just sit around waiting. You live." Those words changed something in Ellen. She began to write poems, short stories, reflections on love, loss and hope. She submitted her writing to small literary magazines, and some were published. Slowly, Ellen was finding her own voice. Meanwhile, James faced his first major test. A major client, a supermarket chain, placed a huge order. It was a chance to triple the company's revenue. But it required investment in new trucks, more employees, and immediate expansion. James didn't have enough money. He went to banks, tried loans, but was rejected by all of them. He had no collateral, no long enough track record. He was about to give up when Marcus called. "I heard about the contract. How much do you need?" James named the amount. Marcus was silent for a few seconds. "You'll have the money, but on one condition. You make me a minority partner. I believe you, kid. Now show me I'm right." James felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Marcus. I won't let you down." With Marcus's investment, James expanded the company. The contract was a success. Sterling Logistics became a benchmark in the region, and Donald, at 25, was no longer the poor warehouse kid. He was a respected businessman. But at night, alone in his simple apartment, he still stared at Ellen's photo. 2 years left to complete the 5 years he'd promised himself. 2 years to become someone worthy of returning. 2 years to discover if their love had stood the test of time. When the past comes, knocking on the door. Again, by his 4th year, James had become unrecognizable. Sterling Logistics now had 50 employees, a fleet of 20 vehicles, and contracts with major companies. James moved into a better apartment, bought decent clothes, and even managed to take his first vacation, but something inside him remained empty. Hector, now the company's operations manager, noticed his brother's sadness. One night after closing a big deal, Hector took James to a bar. They ordered 2 beers and sat in silence for a while. "You need to go after her, bro." James looked at his brother in surprise. "There's still a year left. I promised 5 years. Hector shook his head. "You've already proven everything you had to prove. Not to the Sterlings, but to yourself. What are you waiting for? That she's still there?" Those words stung. James was afraid. Afraid that Ellen had moved on, married into high society, and forgotten all about him. Afraid that all that sacrifice had been in vain. But before James could respond, his phone rang. It was Marcus. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, in my office. It's urgent." The next day, James arrived at Marcus's elegant office in downtown Portland. Marcus was unusually serious. He pointed to a chair and got straight to the point. "Have you heard of Sterling Department Stores?" James felt his blood run cold. Sterling. Ellen's last name, of course. "It's one of the largest chain stores in the area." Marcus handed Donald a briefcase. "They're going bankrupt. Mismanagement, massive debts, labor lawsuits. Richard Sterling is desperate to sell before everything collapses. They're offering the company for 1/3 of its market value." James opened the briefcase with trembling hands. There were all the details: balance sheets, debts, assets. The company that had once humiliated him was on the brink of ruin, and he had enough capital and credit to buy it. "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Donald. "Because I know your story. And I know this isn't just a business opportunity. It's a chance to close a circle, but you have to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." James stayed up all night poring over the documents. Buying Sterling would be the perfect revenge. It would prove Richard wrong. It would show Ellen he had kept his promise. But it would also be risky. The company was in deep trouble, requiring complete restructuring, layoffs, and heavy investment. It could destroy everything he had built. The next morning, James called Marcus. "I'm going to buy it." Negotiations lasted 3 months. James discovered that Richard Sterling was even more arrogant, even when broke. He demanded absurd conditions, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. But James was patient, strategic, and relentless. Finally, on a cold November afternoon, the papers were signed. James now owned Sterling department stores, or rather, what was left of it. When the news spread through town, it was a shock. The poor kid who had been kicked out of the Sterling mansion was now the owner of the family business. Local newspapers covered the story, calling James a business prodigy. But James didn't care about fame. He had only one thing on his mind: Ellen. Hector asked what he would do now. James took a deep breath and looked out his office window. "I need to know if she's still waiting for me." He asked Hector to find out information about Ellen, and what he discovered surprised him. Ellen had never been married. She worked as a freelance writer and volunteered at a community library. She lived alone in a modest apartment downtown, far from her parents' mansion. Apparently, she had broken up with her family after a major argument years earlier. James felt his heart sink. She had given up everything: her wealth, her comfort, her family. And he didn't know if it was for him. One afternoon, James did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He went to the community library where Ellen worked. He stood across the street, hidden behind a tree, just watching. And then he saw her. Ellen emerged from the library, carrying a stack of books, the wind ruffling her brown hair. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but still beautiful, still the woman he loved. James wanted to cross the street, run to her, hug her, but something held him back. He needed to be sure she still wanted him, that he wasn't just interrupting a life she'd built without him. That night, James made a decision. He wrote a letter. He wouldn't sign his name. He would just leave an invitation. The letter read, "There is someone who never forgot you, someone who promised to return. If you still believe, come to Sterling Mansion next Friday at 6 o'clock. He mailed the letter and waited. The encounter that would change everything. Ellen received the letter on a rainy Tuesday. She was returning from the grocery store when she saw the white envelope in her mailbox. There was no return address, just her name handwritten in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Sitting on her small sofa, Ellen carefully opened the letter. She read it once, then twice, then 3 times. Her heart raced. Her hands began to tremble. Someone who promised to return. It had to be him. But what if it wasn't? What if it was just a cruel joke? Or worse, what if it was him, but she was no longer the person he remembered? Ellen spent the next few days in agony. She couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on her work. Rose noticed the change and asked what was happening. Ellen showed her the letter, her hands shaking. Rosa read silently, then smiled with that wise smile only she had. "My daughter, true love, always finds a way back. You're going to that meeting, and you'll find out if his heart still beats to the same rhythm as yours." On Friday morning, Ellen chose a simple light blue dress, the same one she wore the day she met Donald. She didn't know if he would remember, but it was important to her. She combed her hair, put on some makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were frightened, but also hopeful. She took out the letter she had written to James 5 years ago, the one she had never sent. She tucked it into her pocket like a talisman. At 5:30 in the afternoon, Ellen took a bus to the Sterling's old neighborhood. Every block she passed increased her anxiety. She hadn't been to that area since breaking up with her parents 3 years ago. When the bus stopped at the corner of the mansion, Ellen got off on shaky legs. The street was empty, the sun beginning to set on the horizon. The Sterling mansion was exactly as she remembered it. Imposing, cold, impersonal. But something was different. There was a new sign on the gate. Property of Sterling Logistics. Ellen frowned in confusion. Sterling Logistics? She didn't understand. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The same sound James had heard 5 years ago echoed in the silent afternoon. The door opened slowly, but it wasn't Richard or Eleanor standing there. It was Donald. Donald. Ellen felt her legs weaken. He looked different, taller, stronger, shorter hair, wearing a sharp suit, but his eyes were the same. Those eyes she saw in her dreams every night. Donald. He smiled, and in that smile was everything. 5 years of longing, pain, struggle, and love. "Hi, Ellen." She couldn't hold back the tears. He covered his face with his hands, his body shaking with sobs that came from a place too deep. James stepped forward and hugged her tightly. And for the first time in 5 years, Ellen felt at home. They stood there, at the entrance to the mansion, holding each other, crying together. There was no need for words. Everything they needed to say was in that embrace. After a few minutes, James led her inside. The mansion was empty, devoid of furniture, just echoes of a distant past. But in the center of the room were 2 chairs and a small table with lit candles. Ellen looked around, still processing everything. "Did you buy the house?" James shook his head. "I bought the company. The house came with it. Your parents sold everything to pay off their debts." Ellen sat in one of the chairs, stunned. "My father always said you were nothing, that you'd never amount to anything." James sat across from her, gently taking her hands. "I proved him wrong. But it wasn't for revenge, Ellen. It was because I needed to become someone I could respect, someone worthy of you." Ellen squeezed his hands tightly. "You've always been worthy, from day one. I just needed you to see that." James felt a lump in his throat. "You waited for me, even though you didn't know if I would come back." Ellen pulled the yellowed letter from her pocket, the one she'd written 5 years ago. She handed it to James, her hands shaking. "I wrote this the day you left. I never had the courage to send it." James opened the letter and read every word carefully. When he finished, tears streamed down his face. He looked at Ellen as if witnessing a miracle. "I have something for you too." He pulled a small blue velvet box from his pocket. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. It wasn't ostentatious, it wasn't huge, but it had meaning. "I bought this ring 3 years ago. I've been carrying it with me every day, waiting for the right moment. Ellen Sterling, will you still marry me?" Ellen couldn't respond with words. She just nodded, smiling and crying at the same time. James slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made especially for her. In that empty room, in the mansion that once separated them, they kissed, and it was as if the 5 years had disappeared, as if they had never been apart. Outside, the sun was setting completely, but inside that room, a new light was dawning, the light of a love that had survived time, distance, and prejudice. What true love teaches. After the proposal, James and Ellen spent hours talking. Sitting on the floor of that empty mansion, they shared everything they'd experienced over the past 5 years. The struggles, the victories, the lonely nights, the moments when they nearly gave up. Ellen spoke about her breakup with her parents. 3 years earlier, they had tried to force her to marry the son of a businessman. She refused, saying she still loved Donald, even though she didn't know where he was. Richard was furious and said she was dead to the family. Eleanor cried, but didn't defend her. Only grandmother Martha stood by Ellen's side. She was the one who helped her granddaughter rent the apartment, who provided emotional support during her most difficult times. But Martha had passed away a year earlier, leaving Ellen truly alone. James listened in silence, holding Ellen's hands. When she finished, he realized something. She had sacrificed as much as he had, maybe even more, because she wasn't sure he would return. Ellen then asked the question that had been stuck in her throat since she saw him. "Have you had anyone over the years? Any girlfriends? Any relationships?" James shook his head firmly. "Never. Not for a second did I consider being with anyone else. You were the only thing that kept me going when everything seemed impossible." Ellen felt fresh tears well up. "So did I. My parents tried to introduce me to dozens of men, but none of them were you." They were silent for a moment, just staring at each other. And then James said something that changed everything. Ellen, I need to tell you something I've realized over the years. She looked at him carefully. When I started this journey, I thought it was about proving something to my father, to my family, to the world. But along the way, I realized it wasn't about that. It was about proving to myself that I had value, that I wasn't defined by my bank account or my last name. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. And you know what I learned? That true success isn't about money, the company, the cars, or the houses. True success is waking up in the morning and respecting yourself. It's looking in the mirror and recognizing who you are. It's knowing you gave your best, not to impress anyone, but because you deserve it. Ellen squeezed his hands tighter. I bought the company from your parents, yes. And many people will say it was revenge. But the truth is, I bought it because it was a good business opportunity, and because I wanted to transform something that represented prejudice and arrogance into something that represented opportunity and respect. He looked into her eyes intensely. I will restructure this company. I will keep the employees who depend on these jobs. I will transform it into a place where people like me, who came from the bottom, can have a chance. Not out of revenge, but because it's the right thing to do. Ellen felt immense pride swell in her chest. The man in front of her wasn't just the brave boy she'd met in the library. He was someone who had become better through adversity, not bitter or vengeful, but more human. You know what I've learned over the years? Ellen said, her voice soft but firm. I've learned that true love isn't about grand gestures or romantic promises. It's about choosing the same person every day, even when they're not there. It's about believing in someone when the whole world tells you you're wrong. She touched his face tenderly. My grandmother Martha told me something before she died. She said that true love doesn't complete you because you're already complete. True love expands you. It makes you want to be a better version of yourself, not out of obligation, but out of inspiration. James felt those words sink deep into his heart. And you expanded me, Donald. Even from afar, even without knowing where you were, you inspired me to be braver, to break free from everything expected of me and find my own voice. I became a writer because you showed me that it's possible to build something from nothing. They embraced again, and in that embrace lay the secret they had both discovered. True love isn't about possession or dependence. It's about two people choosing to grow together, who support each other through failures, who celebrate victories, who believe in each other even when all seems lost. James whispered in her ear, We're getting married. We're going to build a life together. Not out of obligation to the past, but because we choose to, and we're going to do it our way, without caring what others think. Ellen nodded, her face lit with a genuine smile. Our way. Always. As night fell over Portland, James and Ellen left the mansion hand in hand. The house that had once represented separation now symbolized a new beginning. And they knew the path ahead wouldn't be perfect, that there would be challenges, that life always holds surprises. But they also knew that together they could face anything. Because the love they had built wasn't fragile or based on illusions. It was strong, real, tested by time and distance, and that was something no one ever could take away from them. Where love finds its home. 6 months later, James and Ellen were married. It wasn't at the Sterling mansion, nor in a grand church. It was in a small community garden, the same one where Grandma Martha used to take Ellen as a child. Hector was the best man. Rosa was the matron of honor. Sterling Logistics employees, library friends, Marcus Webb and his family were present. Simple, genuine-hearted people celebrated not just a wedding, but a victory of love over prejudice. Richard and Eleanor Sterling weren't invited, but at the bottom of the garden, hidden among the trees, a figure watched from afar. It was Richard, older, more stooped, his face etched with regret. He saw his daughter smile in a way he'd never seen before, and for the first time in years, he understood the mistake he'd made. When James and Ellen exchanged vows, there was no pomp or elaborate ceremony. Just two people promising to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. And as they kissed under the afternoon sun, everyone there knew they were witnessing something rare, a love that survived the impossible. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't fighting the world. It's believing that love is worth it, even when everything says otherwise. Thank you for watching until the end. This story reminds us that a person's true value lies not in what they possess, but in who they become. Have you ever experienced a love that made you want to be a better person? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends, because true love stories deserve to be told.